On November 18, 1987, in the small town of Ena, Illinois, the Dardine family, Keith, 29, his pregnant wife Elaine, 30, and their 3-year-old son Peter, were brutally murdered in their mobile home in one of the most horrific crime scenes local law enforcement had ever encountered. Keith Dardine was a respected employee at the Rend Lake Water Conservancy District. When he failed to report for his shift, his supervisor, concerned by this uncharacteristic absence, contacted the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department to check on the family. What Deputy Neil Hawkins discovered that afternoon defies comprehension. Inside the modest mobile home, Elaine Dardine and her son Peter had been beaten to death with a baseball bat that belonged to the family. The violence was so extreme that Elaine, who was 7 months pregnant, had gone into labor during the attack. Incredibly, she had delivered the baby girl, who was then also murdered alongside her mother and brother. Their bodies had been carefully arranged on a bed, almost as if posed. Keith Dardine was nowhere to be found. The family's car was missing. The following morning, a hunter made a grisly discovery in a nearby field: Keith Dardine's body. Unlike his family, Keith had been shot in the head and his genitals had been mutilated. The killer had abandoned the family's car close to where Keith's body was found. It was overkill of the worst kind, Sheriff Bob Pitchford told reporters at the time. In my 30 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything like it. The crime scene yielded few clues. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting the killer or killers were either known to the family or had convinced them to open the door. Nothing appeared to be stolen. No murder weapon was ever recovered beyond the family's own baseball bat. The senselessness of the crime stunned investigators. The Dardines were a quiet, hard-working family with no known enemies. They had recently moved to the area, keeping largely to themselves. Keith worked while Elaine stayed home with their son, eagerly preparing for their daughter's arrival. They were described by neighbors as the perfect little family. As investigators dug deeper, they found nothing in the Dardines' background to suggest why they would be targeted for such violence. No drugs, no debts, no affairs, no suspicious associations. It was as if a random force of pure malevolence had descended upon the most unlikely of targets. For years, the case remained cold, despite extensive investigation. Then, in 2000, a serial killer named Tommy Lynn Sells, awaiting execution in Texas for the murder of a 13-year-old girl, made a shocking claim. During a prison interview, he confessed to killing the Dardine family. Sells, who claimed responsibility for dozens of murders across the country during his nomadic life, provided details about the crime that seemed to match the evidence. He claimed he had encountered Keith Dardine at a gas station and had been invited back to the family's home. Once there, he said, he snapped and committed the murders. However, investigators remained skeptical. While Sells knew details about the positioning of the bodies and the baseball bat, other elements of his confession didn't align with the evidence. He couldn't accurately describe the layout of the trailer or explain certain forensic findings. When pressed on these inconsistencies, Sells would simply say his memory was foggy from drug use at the time. Tommy Lynn Sells was executed by lethal injection in Texas on April 3, 2014, without ever providing conclusive proof of his involvement in the Dardine murders. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Department never officially cleared the case. Former Sheriff Roger Mulch, who inherited the investigation years after the murders, summarized the lingering questions. Sells confessed to so many murders that it's hard to know which ones he actually committed. He got some details right about the Dardines, but was that because he was there, or because he'd read about it? We just don't know. The brutality of the Dardine family murders continues to haunt the small community of Ena. The mobile home where the family was killed was eventually demolished. A small memorial was placed on the site, but most locals avoid the area, especially after dark. The surviving family members of Keith and Elaine have spent decades wondering why their loved ones were targeted for such incomprehensible violence. Keith's mother, Joanne Dardine, spent years pressing law enforcement to keep investigating until her death in 2020, never knowing who murdered her son, daughter-in-law, grandson, and the granddaughter she never got to meet. Today, more than 3 decades later, the Dardine family murders remain officially unsolved. The case files remain open. The evidence is preserved. The level of violence in this case is almost beyond comprehension. Do you think Tommy Lynn Sells was responsible, or was it someone else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more in-depth coverage of America's most disturbing unsolved crimes, hit that subscribe button. Between 1969 and 2006, 19 women vanished along a remote 450-mile stretch of asphalt, cutting through the wilderness of British Columbia. Highway 16, running from Prince George to Prince Rupert, earned a chilling nickname among locals, the Highway of Tears. This desolate corridor slices through dense forests and isolated indigenous communities, where cell phone service disappears for hours at a time. Hitchhiking becomes a necessity rather than a choice for many residents without vehicles. Against this backdrop, a predator, or perhaps multiple predators, has hunted with virtual impunity for decades. The first documented victim was Gloria Lavina Moody, a 26-year-old member of the Bella Coola First Nation. On October 25, 1969, Gloria left a bar in Williams Lake and was found dead the next day in a wooded area near Laclahache. Her body showed signs of a brutal struggle. She had fought fiercely for her life. For years, Gloria's death remained an isolated tragedy. Then, on August 9, 1989, Alberta Williams, a 24-year-old from the Gixon First Nation, disappeared after leaving a Prince Rupert pub. Her body was discovered 1 month later, 37 kilometers east of the city along Highway 16. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. The cases continued to mount, each following a disturbing pattern. Young women, predominantly indigenous, would vanish while traveling along the highway. Sometimes their vehicles were found abandoned. In other cases, they were last seen hitchhiking. Their remains, when discovered at all, often appeared months or years later in the dense forests flanking the roadway. Ramona Wilson, 16, disappeared in June 1994 while hitchhiking to a friend's home in Smithers. Her remains were found in April 1995 near the Smithers Airport. Delphine Nicale, 15, vanished while hitchhiking from Smithers to her home in Telkwa in 1990 and has never been found. Perhaps the most well-documented disappearance is that of Nicole Hoare, a 25-year-old tree planter from Alberta who vanished on June 21, 2002, while hitchhiking from Prince George to Smithers. As one of the few non-Indigenous victims, her case received widespread media attention that many others did not. Despite one of the largest searches in the region's history, Nicole remains missing. Throughout these disappearances, witnesses reported strange encounters along the highway, accounts that added a layer of mystery to the mounting tragedies. Multiple drivers described picking up hitchhikers who would vanish from their back seats. Others reported seeing women in distress along the roadside who would disappear when approached. In 1994, a witness claimed to have seen a pickup truck forcibly pulling over a vehicle, driven by a young woman near where Ramona Wilson disappeared. The truck's description matched other reports from different disappearance locations spanning years. Yet police were unable to identify the vehicle or its driver. The investigation faced nearly insurmountable challenges from the start. The vast geographic area spans multiple police jurisdictions, including local RCMP detachments that often operated in isolation from one another. Indigenous communities reported that their concerns were frequently dismissed by authorities, with missing women classified as runaways or transients who had simply moved on. The highway's remote nature eliminated many forensic opportunities. Evidence deteriorated in harsh weather conditions before remains were discovered. The transient nature of the region, with seasonal workers, tourists, and long-haul truckers passing through, created an ever-shifting population of potential witnesses and suspects. By 2005, The scale of the tragedy could no longer be ignored. The RCMP established Project EPANA, a task force dedicated to investigating 9, later expanded to 18, unsolved murders and disappearances along Highways 16, 97, and 5. The project name comes from the Inuit word for the spirit goddess who looks after the souls as they travel from this world to the next. In 2012, the investigation identified Bobby Jack Fowler, an American criminal who died in prison in 2006, as the likely killer of 16-year-old Colleen McMillan, who disappeared in 1974. DNA evidence linked him to her murder. Investigators believe Fowler may be responsible for at least 3 other Highway of Tears cases, but conclusive evidence remains elusive. Yet even as authorities announced this potential breakthrough, the highway claimed another victim. Madison Scott, 20, vanished after attending a party at Hogsback Lake, just off Highway 16 near Vanderhoof, on May 28, 2011. Her tent and truck were found at the campsite, but Madison had disappeared without a trace. The most disturbing aspect of the Highway of Tears cases may be their ongoing nature. While public awareness has grown and safety measures have improved, including a limited public transportation system along sections of the route, the cases continue. In 2018, 18-year-old Jessica Patrick disappeared from Smithers. Her body was found 2 weeks later on Hudson Bay Mountain. Indigenous communities have long maintained that the official count of victims significantly underrepresents the true scope of the tragedy. Family members of the missing have conducted their own searches, erected memorials along the highway, and fought to keep the cases in the public eye when media attention waned. "We've been saying for years that there's someone out there taking our women," said Matilda Wilson, mother of Ramona Wilson, at a 2006 symposium on the disappearances. "No one believed us until the bodies started piling up." The Highway of Tears stands as one of Canada's most disturbing unsolved crime sprees. As drivers travel Highway 16 today, red dresses hang from trees along the route, a haunting memorial to the missing women. They flutter in the wind beside signs warning, "Girls don't hitchhike. Killers on this road." At 4:20 a.m. on June 18, 2013, a Mercedes C250 coupe traveling at maximum speed crashed into a palm tree on Highland Avenue in Los Angeles. The vehicle erupted into a fireball so intense that it took firefighters nearly an hour to extinguish the flames. Inside was the body of 33-year-old Michael Hastings, one of America's most fearless investigative journalists, a man who just hours before his death had told friends he was onto a big story and needed to go off the radar. Michael Hastings built his reputation on exposing uncomfortable truths about the powerful. After graduating from New York University in 2002, he cut his teeth as a war correspondent in Iraq and Afghanistan for Newsweek. His unfiltered reporting style often put him at odds with military officials who preferred a more sanitized version of events. "I don't think Michael ever self-censored," said Tom Shanker of the New York Times. "He always wanted to get as close as possible to the unvarnished truth." In 2010, Hastings achieved international recognition with his Rolling Stone article, "The Runaway General," a profile of General Stanley McChrystal that captured the commander and his staff making disparaging remarks about civilian government officials. The article won the George Polk Award and led directly to McChrystal's resignation. At 30 years old, Hastings had demonstrated his willingness to challenge even the highest echelons of military power. He continued this trajectory with hard-hitting pieces on the FBI, the CIA, and surveillance programs. By 2013, his focus had shifted to what would become his final investigation. In the weeks before his death, Hastings told colleagues at BuzzFeed, where he worked as a contributor, that he was researching a major story involving the CIA. Simultaneously, he expressed growing concern about government surveillance of journalists. On June 17, 2013, just hours before his fatal crash, Hastings contacted WikiLeaks attorney Jennifer Robinson, stating that the FBI was investigating him. That same afternoon, he sent an email to colleagues with the subject line, FBI investigation, RE-NSA. The email read, "I'm onto a big story and need to go off the radar for a bit. Also, I'm being investigated by the FBI. Let me know if you have any questions when you can. Also, if the FBI comes to talk to you, please contact legal counsel before responding." At approximately 4:20 a.m. the following morning, witnesses reported seeing Hastings' Mercedes traveling at extremely high speed before crashing into a palm tree in the Hancock Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. The impact was so severe that the engine was ejected 100 feet from the vehicle. The car burst into flames immediately. The Los Angeles Police Department initially ruled the death an accident, suggesting no foul play was involved. The coroner's report determined that Hastings had traces of methamphetamine and marijuana in his system, though not at levels typically associated with impaired driving. The official conclusion, a tragic high-speed accident. But questions emerged immediately. Former U.S. National Coordinator for Security, Richard Clark, told the Huffington Post it was consistent with a car cyber attack. There is reason to believe that intelligence agencies for major powers have developed the capability to remotely seize control of a car. So if there were a cyber attack on the car, and I'm not saying there was, the signs of it might well have been erased. Hastings had expressed his own fears about vehicle hacking. In his 2012 book, The Operators, he wrote about being warned that military officials might try to have me killed in Afghanistan. After his death, journalist Kimberly Dvorak reported that Hastings' home and computer had been visited by federal agents. His widow, Elise Jordan, later confirmed that his laptop had been thoroughly burned in the crash. When investigators returned the computer, she found the hard drive missing. Even more disturbing were the experiences of his colleagues who attempted to continue his work. 3 BuzzFeed journalists who began looking into Hastings' final investigation reported receiving unusual warnings. One found evidence of computer intrusion. Another discovered that personal files had been accessed and copied. A third reported unusual surveillance outside his home. Former Staff Sergeant Joe Biggs, who had known Hastings from his time in Afghanistan, received an email from the journalist just hours before the crash. He was working on a big story, and he needed to get off the radar, Biggs told KTLA News. When I heard that he died, the first thing that popped into my head was, he was murdered. What was the story that had Hastings so concerned? Multiple sources suggested he was investigating then CIA Director John Brennan and the agency's expanding role in domestic surveillance. Others pointed to his ongoing research into drone warfare and covert operations. Hastings had previously told friends he was receiving death threats related to his Afghanistan reporting. The FBI denied that Hastings was ever under investigation. However, documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests later revealed that the Bureau had indeed compiled a file on him, specifically related to his Afghanistan reporting. Perhaps most troubling was the Mercedes itself. Automotive experts noted that a modern C250 has numerous computerized systems that should have prevented the kind of acceleration witnesses described. The car's electronic control module, which might have recorded data from the crash, was never found among the wreckage. In 2015, WikiLeaks released CIA documents from its Vault 7 cache that detailed the intelligence agency's capabilities to remotely hack vehicle control systems. The timing of this revelation, coming 2 years after Hastings' death, renewed interest in the circumstances of the crash. Today, Michael Hastings' death remains officially classified as an accident. No criminal investigation was ever opened. His widow, while acknowledging the unusual circumstances, has publicly accepted the official explanation, telling CNN's Piers Morgan, "I have no doubt that the crash was an accident." His colleague and friend Matt Farwell, who was working with Hastings on his final story, summed it up. The thing about Michael is that he always had a lot of irons in the fire. It's possible he was onto something that someone didn't want out there. Whatever truth Michael Hastings uncovered in his final investigation died with him on that Los Angeles street. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to support independent journalism, share this video with someone who values truth-seeking. If you found these stories as compelling and disturbing as I did, please take a moment to subscribe to Murder and Mystery HQ and join our community of mystery seekers. Hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss a case. Stay safe and stay curious.